All right, ready to dive deep into the world of Zoom.
Absolutely.
We're going to figure out how this company, which just seemed to explode onto the scene, actually makes its money, what their big costs are, and how they try to stand out in the, unbelievably crowded world of online communication.
Yeah, it's a fascinating case study.
And the best part, we're using Zoom's own financial reports, 10Ks and 10Qs. It's like having a backstage pass, right?
Definitely. It's like getting a peek behind the curtain to see how they operate.
Exactly. So first things first, how does Zoom actually bring in the cash? What are their main revenue streams?
Well, their bread and butter, as you might expect, is definitely subscriptions to their unified communications and collaboration platform.
Okay, so that's Zoom meetings, right? What else?
Right, but also Zoom Phone and Zoom Team Chat, they're trying to be a lot more than just a meeting tool these days.
Interesting. So how does that, branching out beyond just video meetings actually affect their bottom line? Are these new products as profitable?
That's a great question. With Zoom Phone, for example, it's a little more complicated. They offer a range of plans, and some of them require Zoom to pay fees to telephone carriers.
Oh, I see. So that cuts into their profit.
Exactly. It can definitely eat into their profit margins.
So it's a trade-off, right?
Yeah.
Expanding their offerings, trying to become more of a one-stop shop, but maybe facing lower profits on some of these newer products.
Exactly. It's a strategic decision. You can see it reflected in their one platform strategy. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out in the long run.
Yeah. Speaking of strategy, their reports also give us some insights into who they're going after as customers. What kind of businesses are they focusing on?
Well, from their reports, it seems pretty clear that they're focused on bigger organizations.
Really?
Oh, yeah. In fact, their 2023 10K showed that a whopping 27% of their revenue came from just 3,471 customers, each generating over $100,000 in revenue.
Wow. So not just individuals signing up for a free account, they're really going after those big contracts.
Absolutely. And when you look at what they emphasize in their reports, reliability, all the features they offer, integrations with tools like Atlassian and Dropbox. These are things that big companies really need and value.
Right. It's like they're tailoring their entire platform to appeal to those bigger fish.
Yeah.
But they still have to keep those individual users happy too, right? That's how they blew up in the first place.
You're absolutely right. They can't ignore where they came from. And, their financial reports do highlight that ease of use as a key part of their value proposition. It's interesting to see how they balance that with those more complex needs of larger organizations.
Yeah, it's a tightrope walk for sure. Okay, so we've talked about how Zoom brings in the money and who they're targeting. But what about the costs? Keeping a platform like this up and running can't be cheap, right?
No, you're right. It definitely isn't. One of the biggest expenses they have is personnel.
Ah, so salaries and benefits for all those employees.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
exactly. Especially in areas like research and development and, sales and marketing.
Yeah. Right, they need great engineers to keep innovating and a strong sales team to bring in those big contracts we were just talking about.
Exactly. And actually, their financial statements actually reveal some interesting details about how they spend on sales commissions. They capitalize and amortize them over time.
Okay, hold on. What does that even mean?
Essentially, it means they treat those commissions as an investment. They spread the cost out over the lifetime of the customer relationship they're building.
Ah, I see. It's more of a long-term view. They're not just trying to chase quick wins.
Exactly.
Okay, so personnel's one big cost. What else?
Another massive expense is infrastructure. They had to scale up their systems massively during the pandemic to handle that surge in usage.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Everything went virtual overnight.
Right. And that kind of expansion, it requires a huge amount of investment. Data centers, servers, network capacity, it all adds up.
And they're probably still feeling the effects of that, right? Even though things have calmed down a bit, they still need to make sure their platform can handle a ton of users all at once.
Absolutely. And their most recent reports indicate they're still working on optimizing their infrastructure. They even mention potentially restructuring things in the future to manage those costs.
Yeah, that makes sense. Trying to be efficient, but also making sure the user experience is still top-notch.
What about marketing? They have to be spending a fortune to stay top of mind, Rand.
You're telling me their reports show that they're very actively promoting their brand through events like their Zoomtopia conference, doing a lot of digital marketing, and partnering with other companies.
Yeah, they're going all in to make sure Zoom's the first thing businesses think of when they need a communication solution. So it sounds like they're putting a lot of effort into building that value proposition, ease of use, reliability, Lots of features, integrations with all those tools that businesses are already using.
Exactly. They're trying to create a whole ecosystem around their brand.
It's almost like they want to become the operating system for how we connect and work online.
That's a pretty good way to put it. It's a very ambitious goal. So we've covered how Zoom makes money, who they're targeting, and some of their big costs. It's clear they're playing in the big leagues, but it looks like they've got some serious challenges too.
Definitely. And their financial reports give us a really interesting window into how they're navigating those challenges, making those tough decisions and trying to chart a course for continued success.
Well, I'm definitely ready to hear more. What other insights can we pull from these financial reports? What stands out to you as particularly interesting or maybe even surprising?
Well, in the next part, let's dig into some of the more intriguing details. We'll see how their explosive growth during the pandemic has shaped their strategy and explore some of the risks and opportunities they're facing. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. Ready to really dig into the numbers.
Oh, yeah. Let's get our hands dirty. What jumps out at you when you look at these reports? Anything surprising?
Well, we can't really talk about Zoom's financials without addressing the pandemic, right?
True. They became the go-to for everything. Remote work, virtual happy hours, you name it. Exactly. Their fiscal year 2021, which ended January 31st, 2021, was just insane growth for them. Usage and revenue just skyrocketed.
Their 10K for that year shows a revenue increase of 326% compared to the previous year. That's mind-blowing.
It was a crazy time. Everybody suddenly needed to connect remotely, and Zoom was right there.
Right place, right time. But the world's opened back up now. So did Zoom manage to keep up that crazy growth?
That's the big question, isn't it? Well, their growth has slowed down, which is natural, but it's still pretty impressive. They increased revenue by 55% in fiscal year 2022 and another 7% in 2023.
Okay, so still growing, but not at that warp speed we saw during the peak of the pandemic.
Right, and that's where their strategic decisions become even more important. They know that maintaining that level of hypergrowth just isn't realistic anymore.
So they're shifting gears, right? Focusing on a more sustainable pace of growth, making sure they're actually profitable.
Exactly, and their financial statements show how they're doing that. For example, their gross margin has been really consistent, around 75%.
Okay, pause for a sec. For those of us who don't speak fluent finance, what's gross margin and why is it important?
Sure. Gross margin is essentially a way to measure profitability. It tells us how much money Zoom keeps from each dollar of revenue after paying for the direct costs of providing their services.
Okay, so things like the cost of running their servers and all that infrastructure.
Exactly. So a higher gross margin means they're keeping more of their revenue, which is obviously a good thing.
Got it. So 75% is good.
Yeah, that's very healthy, especially for a tech company. It shows their core business model is pretty efficient. They can scale up without their costs going crazy.
That's good news. But we also need to look at their operating expenses, right? The costs of actually running the business.
Absolutely. And those have been increasing, but for a strategic reason. They're investing a lot in research and development.
Yeah, got to keep innovating, especially in the world of tech, right?
Exactly. Their 10 Qs even highlight the need to attract and retain top engineers, the best talent.
Which I'm sure doesn't come cheap.
Nope. But it's an investment in the future. They're also putting a lot of money into sales and marketing, especially to land those big enterprise clients we talked about earlier.
Smart move, but it's another cost. So personnel and infrastructure are big ones. Anything else?
Oh, yeah. We can't forget about that huge infrastructure expansion they had to do during the pandemic.
I can only imagine the scrambling they had to do to handle that surge in users.
Their 10Ks actually shed light on that. They're constantly having to upgrade their data centers, cloud services, all that, to make sure everything can handle the load.
It's all about finding that balance, right? Keeping costs under control, but making sure their platform is reliable, that users have a good experience. No one wants to deal with outages and glitches.
Absolutely. They can't afford any major hiccups, especially now that they're going after those big business clients.
True. Speaking of costs, what about stock-based compensation? That's a significant expense for them, right?
Right. Things like stock options. It's a way to attract and retain top talent, especially in such a competitive industry.
So giving employees a piece of the pie, literally.
Exactly. Aligning everyone's interests. But it does impact their earnings per share, which is something investors watch very closely.
It's all a balancing act, right? Keeping employees happy, but also making sure investors are happy.
Exactly. But even with all these increasing costs, Zoom has managed to stay profitable.
That's impressive. Their net income, their bottom line, has stayed positive.
It really shows that their business model is solid, even as they're navigating all these challenges.
So what's the big takeaway from all this financial data? What story is it telling us?
Well, I think it shows a company in transition. They're moving away from that explosive, pandemic fueled growth and focusing on something more sustainable.
They're thinking long term now.
Exactly. And they're doing that by investing strategically in their platform, in their people, and in their infrastructure.
Makes sense. And they're also expanding internationally, but cautiously, because each market has its own risks and challenges.
Exactly. Their financials show a real commitment to balancing growth with profitability, innovation with security, and short term goals with long term vision.
It's a dynamic situation, for sure. It'll be really interesting to see how they adapt and continue to grow.
Speaking of interesting, let's dive into some of those more intriguing details we see in their reports.
Okay, I'm all ears. What have you uncovered?
Well, one thing that stood out to me was their customer concentration.
You mean how much of their revenue comes from just a few big clients?
Right. While no single customer makes up more than 10% of their revenue, a good chunk comes from a relatively small group of big organizations.
Yeah, their 10K for 2023 stated that 27% of their revenue came from just 3,471 customers, each generating over $100,000.
Exactly. It shows how important those big enterprise contracts are to them.
But that also makes them a little vulnerable, right? What if one of those big clients goes with a competitor?
It's a valid concern, and it's something they're actively working on. They're trying to diversify their customer base, expand into new markets, spread the risk a bit.
Makes sense. Smart move. What else caught your eye?
Their international expansion strategy. They see a lot of potential overseas, but they're being cautious.
Yeah, their 10Ks mention all the complexities of navigating different regulations, currency fluctuations, political uncertainty, all of that.
Right, they've even felt the impact of the strengthening US dollar on their international revenue.
It's easy to forget how much global economics can impact a company's bottom line.
Absolutely. Even seemingly small changes can have a big impact. And speaking of global events, their financial reports actually even mention the impact of the conflict in Ukraine and the sanctions.
Wow, I wouldn't have thought a company like Zoom would be directly affected by that.
It just shows how interconnected everything is. They acknowledge that it could disrupt their business, especially in those regions.
It's a good reminder that geopolitical events can have ripple effects everywhere.
Absolutely. Even the best laid plans can be disrupted by unforeseen events. It's all about agility and adaptability.
So true. Now, let's shift gears a bit. What about their tax situation? Anything interesting there?
Well, they've been impacted by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. Specifically, the rule about capitalizing and amortizing research and development expenses.
So instead of deducting those expenses right away, they have to spread the cost over time.
Exactly. And that can affect their cash flow in the short term. They've had to adapt their planning, and they even mention the possibility of Congress changing that rule in the future.
It's amazing how changes in tax policy can have such a ripple effect, even years later.
It shows how important it is for companies to stay informed and be ready to adapt.
Definitely. Now, one last thing that I found interesting was their use of open source software.
Ah, yes. Open source can be really valuable for companies like Zoom. They can use existing code and save money on development costs.
But it's not without risks, right?
You got it. Zoom even acknowledges that in their reports. There's the potential for legal challenges and even the possibility of having to disclose some of their own code under certain circumstances.
A double-edged sword.
Exactly. They're working to mitigate those risks, but it's something they have to be very careful about.
It's all about finding that balance,
Hmm.
taking advantage of the benefits of open source, but also protecting their own intellectual property and minimizing their vulnerabilities.
Right. It's a challenge for a lot of tech companies.
So, wow, we've covered a lot of ground here. Their pandemic growth, their strategic investments, international expansion, taxes, open source software. These reports have really given us a look behind the scenes.
They really have. Their financials tell us so much about their priorities, their challenges, what they're thinking about for the future.
It's like we've taken apart a complex machine and seen all the gears and levers that make it work.
And it's a machine that's constantly adapting and evolving.
It's a fascinating story of growth, innovation, and resilience. And the story's not over yet. There's still more to explore.
Definitely. And in our final part, we'll shift our focus to the future. We'll look at their growth prospects, the competitive landscape, and the key factors that will determine their success or failure.
And we'll leave you with some questions to ponder as you think about Zoom's place in the world.
It's a story that's relevant to anyone who uses technology, really.
because in a lot of ways, Zoom's story reflects our own increasingly digital lives. Welcome back. We've taken a deep dive into Zoom's financials, their strategies, and uncovered some really interesting stuff along the way.
Absolutely, it's been quite a journey.
It has. But now, let's look ahead. What does the future hold for Zoom?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. What do you think? What are the big things that will determine their success or maybe even failure in the years to come?
Well, I think a lot depends on whether they can keep growing in a world where, things aren't quite as virtual as they were a couple of years ago.
That's true. That pandemic-era growth was incredible, but it couldn't last forever.
Right. So the question is, where do they go from here? Can they find new ways to grow?
Well, their reports, those 10Ks and 10Qs, give us some hints. They seem to be betting on becoming more than just a video conferencing company.
Exactly. Zoom Phone, Zoom Team Chat, Zoom Contact Center, all part of that one platform strategy. They want to be the solution for all your communication needs.
They don't just want to be the video meeting app anymore. They want to be the central hub, like the glue that holds everything together.
Exactly. But it's a tough market. They're up against some really big players.
Yeah, Microsoft with Teams, Google with Workspace, Cisco with WebEx. Those are some serious competitors.
They're not messing around.
So how can Zoom compete? What makes them different?
Well, they're focusing on what they're already known for, making things easy and user-friendly.
Right, their reports really emphasize that. They talk about their happiness-centric culture and how they're always trying to make their platform simple, reliable, and packed with useful features.
And don't forget about integrations, making sure Zoom works seamlessly with all the other tools businesses use.
Like Microsoft Office, Slack, Dropbox, all those essential tools.
It's all about making it easy for businesses to adopt Zoom, to make it part of their everyday workflow.
No friction. Okay, so ease of use and integration. What else?
Well, international expansion is huge for them. They see a lot of potential overseas, but it's not easy.
No, we've talked about that. Different regulations, currency fluctuations, all those things they have to navigate.
Right, and they've already felt the impact of a strong U.S. dollar on their revenue.
It's a global market, and it's complex. And then there's security. They've faced some criticism in the past for vulnerabilities.
Yeah, but they're addressing that head on. They're investing a lot in security, offering things like end-to-end encryption.
But the threats are always evolving, right?
Yeah.
Hackers are getting more sophisticated all the time.
Exactly. And the stakes are higher now because Zoom is being used for more sensitive things. And then, of course, there's the whole issue of managing the risks of open source software, which we discussed earlier.
Right, reaping the benefits, but also protecting themselves.
Exactly. And then there's the wild card, artificial intelligence.
Oh, yeah. AI is everywhere these days.
And Zoom is embracing it. Think about features like noise suppression and virtual backgrounds. Those are powered by AI.
But even they acknowledge that AI isn't a silver bullet. There are risks too, right?
Absolutely. Their reports even mention concerns about potential bias in AI algorithms, the possibility of legal and reputational issues. It's powerful technology, but it has to be handled carefully.
So it seems like Zoom's future is full of potential, but also a lot of challenges. They need to keep growing, beat out the competition, figure out international expansion, stay ahead of security threats, and manage the risks of AI.
It's a lot to juggle.
It really is. But they do have a lot going for them. They've got a strong brand, a loyal customer base, a talented team, and they're in a good financial position.
And they seem to be making smart strategic decisions.
Yeah, I think that's key. So as we wrap up this deep dive, the question for you, our listeners, is this. Do you think Zoom has what it takes to not only survive, but to truly thrive in the years to come?
Will they become the leader in this ever-changing world of communication and collaboration?
Or will they get overtaken by the competition? Or maybe stumble over some of these hurdles? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Zoom.
We've really gotten into the nitty-gritty of their business model, their strategies, and what the future might hold.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It has. And remember, the world of technology never stands still. Zoom's story is just one part of a much bigger story that's constantly unfolding.
Keep exploring, stay curious, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.